State of the franchise for the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers finished this past NFL season with a record of 5-12, and it was a really disappointing season, especially when you look at the expectations that Carolina Panthers fans had going into this year. There were a lot of Panthers fans who were expecting this team to have somewhere between 9 and 11 wins, and that didn't really happen. Now, I felt like Carolina going into this season was a borderline playoff team. Like, yeah, they did have some pieces that they could be a playoff team, but they were also lacking in several critical areas. One being quarterback. We didn't really know how Sam Darnold was going to pan out, and obviously he wasn't that good after the first 3 games. His play went right down in the drain. They brought back Cam Newton. They experimented with him. That didn't work. And then they had PJ Walker. He wasn't really able to get much going. So the offense was a mess. So you get rid of Joe Brady during the middle of the season, and then, the offense still doesn't improve. And there were many people who didn't really like the decision to get rid of Joe Brady. Like, they felt like it was done for the wrong reasons. They felt like the move to get rid of Joe Brady was more due to Matt Rhule trying to use him as a scapegoat and trying to buy him more time. So now you replace Joe Brady with former New York Giants head coach Ben Mcadoo. Now, Ben Mcadoo, I can't recall the last time he was an OC or whatnot, but when he was the head coach for the Giants, their offense was pretty good. They had some pretty good offenses. This is when OBJ was still with the Giants. You had that OBJ, Eli Manning connection, and Eli Manning played some of his most efficient football under Ben Mcadoo when he was their head coach. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the offense for Carolina looks next season in 2022. Is Ben Mcadoo going to be able to rekindle some of that early magic that he had a couple of years ago? Or is he somebody who has ran his course similar to a Pat Shurmur? Because you remember Pat Shurmur was also the head coach of the New York Giants. He was somebody who was regarded as a pretty good play caller even after he was released of his head coaching duties for the Giants. So he ends up going to Denver, and Denver's offense didn't really do much with Pat Shurmur calling the plays. So you have to wonder if Ben Mcadoo is going to end up having a similar fate of Pat Shurmur, or if he's going to be able to get things figured out, because this Carolina Panthers team has a lot of talent, at least when you look at it from a skill position standpoint. Like, you have DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. That's one of the better wide receiver duos in the league. Okay, you're going to have to figure out if Ben Mcadoo is going to find a way to get Robbie Anderson the ball, because Robbie Anderson could be really good in space because how fast he is, but he also can be a really good deep threat. You got Terrence Marshall, who can end up being a really good slot receiver if utilized the right way. Okay, then you got Christian McCaffrey, who is one of the best running backs in the league when healthy. So the main thing that Carolina has to address has to be the offensive line. Okay, like, if you can get that offensive line fixed up, then whoever's going to be playing quarterback is going to have a lot easier time getting the ball out to these talented wide receivers. That's going to be the next question. Who's going to be the starting quarterback for Carolina? Okay, are you going to draft a quarterback? Are you going to sign a quarterback? Because Carolina, with the draft position that they currently have right now, like, they are going to be in the running to get one of the better quarterbacks in the draft, whether that be Matt Corral or Kenny Pickett. So they're going to have their stab at trying to get one of the best QBs in the upcoming draft, even though this is a pretty weak quarterback class. Or would the Carolina Panthers trade for a veteran quarterback like a Jimmy Garoppolo or Derek Carr if he's available for trade? Or somebody who I really think would be a great fit for Carolina could be Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew has been really good in the brief appearances that he's had with Philadelphia. Really good during his time with the Jacksonville Jaguars, despite not having a lot of great pieces around him. Still was really solid. And I think with Carolina, Gardner Minshew could have a lot of success there. Now, the defense doesn't need to be touched at all. Carolina has one of the best, most talented defenses in the league. You got Hassan Reddick, who had a really good season. He was a really good free agency pickup. You got Brian Burns, one of the best young and up-and-coming pass rushers in the league. And then, you still could improve at linebacker. You got Derek Brown there, who's been really solid, but linebacker probably could need some improvement. Your other cornerback spots, you probably could use a little bit more depth there, even though you did trade for CJ Henderson. So you're trying to see what you got out of him. But overall, I can't forget Jeremy Chin, but overall, the defense for Carolina doesn't really need much sprucing up. It's really going to come down to the offense. And when you look at Matt Rhule, Matt Rhule, coming out of Baylor, was somebody who is known as a team builder. He was somebody who builds programs up from, rock bottom and builds them up into contenders. And going into year 3, this is going to be a make or break year for Matt Rhule. Like, at this point, if you're a Panthers fan now, it's playoff or bust going into the 2022 NFL season, because I didn't really expect Carolina to make it into the playoffs this past season. I just felt like the offensive line was a little bit too shaky for them to get in. So for them to get into the playoffs, the offensive line definitely has to get fixed up. But for Matt Rhule, you have to wonder, he lost the locker room this year. You have to wonder if he's going to be able to get it back. Is he going to be able to build up that culture good enough to turn around the Panthers? Because that's really important. Winning in the NFL is more than just what you do on the field. It's also how you build that culture in the locker room with your players. Does he have a good relationship with his players? Are his players willing to run through a brick wall? Didn't really look like that, because the Panthers actually regressed. Even though they only won the 5 games in their first year under Matt Rhule, they were way more competitive year 1 under Matt Rhule than they were year 2, because year 1, they were in a handful of one-possession games in which, if the ball would have bounced in a different direction, a couple of those games, Carolina probably could have had an outside chance of making it into the playoffs year 1 under Matt Rhule. This year, they were blown out a handful of times, and a lot of their games weren't really close. And as a matter of fact, 3 out of their 5 wins this year came the first 3 weeks of the regular season. So that means they only won 2 games after that. So Carolina right now, I don't really think that this franchise is in a bad direction right now or a good one. I'm really on the fence, because I really think that Carolina could surprise a lot of people next season. I think that this is a team that can easily go from bottom of the division to top of the division really quickly, because everything pretty much is good defensively. There's not really nothing much that you need to improve on that side. Maybe linebacker, but then offensively you have to improve the offensive line. You have to figure out who's going to be your starting quarterback for next season. So those are 2 really big question marks for Carolina. But if Carolina can get those situated, I think that this is a team that definitely could end up making it to the playoffs. And I also feel like they could end up competing for a spot in this division. And yes, I do feel like this roster, if they can address the offensive line, the quarterback can end up competing with teams like New Orleans and Tampa Bay for number 1 in the NFC South. So Carolina is a team that's going to be really intriguing to watch as we progress throughout the NFL offseason, because this is a team that's just a couple of pieces away from being a legitimate playoff contender and even a Super Bowl contender. You saw the jump that Arizona made. You saw what Philadelphia did this past season. Why can't Carolina be that next team to do that? It's all really going to depend on Matt Rhule, because Matt Rhule is known as a guy who's supposed to be good at building up a team, building up a good winning culture, and so far that hasn't really happened. Look how hard the players for the Detroit Lions play for their head coach and Dan Campbell versus how these players play for Matt Rhule. On top of that, Matt Rhule isn't really somebody who's been all that accountable. He never really takes accountability for losses. So I'm just on the fence for the Carolina Panthers. I'm not giving up on them, but at the same time, I definitely feel like this, with how the franchise is right now, it could go either way. It can go to them being really, really bad and having to get rid of Matt Rhule, or they can end up surprising everybody and making it to the playoffs, which I do believe that they have that capability to do so, but it just depends on the remaining moves that Matt Rhule and company make throughout the remainder of the offseason.